Melissa De La Cruz. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, it's good to
Says
be
hello
here.
also.
Hi, Mabel.
Esteemed audience knows that Mabel can't resist making an appearance every episode. So here she is. Hopefully she'll behave herself. We'll see. So I never summarize anyone's biography or anyone's book. It's just a great way to get myself in trouble. So probably the best place to start is if you would kind of give an esteemed audience a little bit of an overview of your background.
Sure. I have written, I would say, almost 60 books. I actually think the count is 63. I've written mostly for the young adult market, but also middle grade and adult and nonfiction. I started as a journalist. I was a beauty editor and a fashion editor, and I worked at Allure magazine. And I wrote for Harper's Bazaar, Marie Claire, Cosmopolitan, Teen Vogue, and then I published my first novel called Cat's Meow, which was a women's fiction novel that kind of came out during the Bridget Jones era. And now I mostly write books for kids.
I've got outdated information. I had just over 50, which had already floored me, but coming up on 63. Wow. That is incredibly prolific. When did you first know you wanted to write fiction, and when did you decide you specifically wanted to focus on young adult and middle grade?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I always wanted to write books. The journalism was a way to write books because I wrote my first novel that was unsold at 22, and my agent sent it to a bunch of editors. And one of the editors said, "Have you ever written for magazines or newspapers?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I kind of advise, people who want to be writers to kind of learn how to be a professional writer, get your clip file going, make a name for yourself, and then, try to sell your novel." So that's kind of what I did. With his advice, I started writing for magazines and newspapers. And then I wrote a second novel, which was also unsold. And then by the time my third novel was out for submission, he was one of the editors who bid on it. So it took about 5 years from that lunch meeting.
That's amazing, because you had quite an extensive career in journalism, which I assume is probably still kind of ongoing whenever you have time.
Not really. It kind of ended.
Write 3 novels.
Yeah.
Something.
I did try to keep it up a little bit. Mostly when I moved to Los Angeles, because I was in New York, and that's where I was a journalist. And I thought I would be able to do the same thing here that I did in New York, but sadly it was a little harder to do that. So, but it was okay, because the books kind of took off. And you had asked me about when I started writing for young adults, or knew when that's what I wanted to do. So I think The Au Pairs was my third or fourth published book. But when I was writing it, and I was on book tour for a book that I was promoting that I'd written with my friend called How to Become Famous in 2 Weeks or Less. And we were on book tour for this book, which was before the reality show kind of advent of pop culture. It was before Paris Hilton was Paris Hilton. And it was funny because she actually hosted one of our launch parties for that book. So while I was on tour for this book, I was writing The Au Pairs, and I remember being on the plane and writing it and thinking, oh my God, this is really fun, and this is what I should really be doing. I really enjoyed writing for teenagers, and I really thought that my voice kind of lent itself well to that. And I always tell people that's why the reason that I write for teens is because, when you're 17, the cool guy in the motorcycle, shoplifts and is so amazing, is so cool at 17 and such a loser at 35. So we like to stay when it's all.
You're looking back to a time when those fellows were cooler.
Yeah.
So, lots to unpack there, because I know I had seen elsewhere that you had a day job, and that you missed the sound of other people in an office typing on computers. I imagine extra this is year of 2020. and that you had thought about renting an office just so you could be surrounded by coworkers again. Is that anything come from that thus
So
far?
the 5 years that I was trying to get my first novel published, I was a computer programmer, and I worked in an office, and I would write my novel, kind of on the sly at work. And yes, the very soothing sounds of, the phones ringing, murmuring, and people typing, just kind of imprinted in my brain as the best, kind of way to write. Yeah, I've kind of gotten used to not having that anymore, but yeah, and I do sometimes write at kind of, communal workplaces like WeWork or Soho House. I find it a little too distracting now. I think everybody's chatting too much. The thing about working at a bank is that, we were all kind of quiet and at our desks, mostly playing solitaire, but,
Well, looking extremely busy and professionally
Yes.
dressed. There's got to be like an ambient noises soundtrack you could get for your writing office. You could just play getting up for coffee in the background.
Yeah.
So, obviously, you're New York Times bestseller multiple times over. You've won multiple awards. You're kind of a big deal. You're writing for multiple huge series. My son has been watching The Descendants since we got Disney Plus, and so he's 6. But I told him I'm going to talk with the author of the Descendants books. He's, oh my gosh, very excited, and even more excited because you've written Hamilton fiction as well. And then I'm excited because you've written Gotham High, which esteemed audience knows Batman is a big part of my life, but probably larger than it should be for a grown man. But continue. So, at what point did you feel like, oh, okay, this has gone from something that I wanted to do to this is for sure a career? I made it, or has that happened yet?
I always wanted it to be a career. I didn't really want to do anything else. I wanted to figure out how to make writing books be what I did all the time and my income. And I think that's something that I was lucky enough, to kind of do because I had a day job for about 9 years, and then I quit. Well, really, I was laid off, so who knows if I would have written full time. But I had a day job, and I was laid off during the recession of 2000. And then I spent 3 months writing my first novel that was going to be published. And after that, kind of being able to live frugally and being able to say goodbye to my corporate job and not miss it at all. And, kind of live on, what I'd made from the book, and then I'd written, I think, 4 or 5 proposals during that time as well. And I'm pretty sure I sold about 3 of them that summer. And after that, I thought, oh, I can do this, And yeah, I mean, I think it's so difficult to have a career in fiction. But I think there's a little bit too much thinking sometimes that it's this miracle or this kind of impossible thing that can never be attained. I mean, I do know a lot of writers who have, who still have day jobs because they don't want their income to be tied to their work. They want to be able to, quote, write what they like, to have the freedom and to not have the stress of, their creative work having to provide their lifestyle. I don't know, for some reason, I was just always okay with that kind of stress. I'd been a freelancer when I got laid off. That's when I was also a journalist full time. And I was a freelancer, which meant, I kind of lived by my wits. We had to pitch magazine editors, all the stories. And then they would say, no, yes, do that. And you kind of lived article to article a little bit. So I think between those two things, my freelance career, and then, kind of really enjoying my life in a way that I didn't when I had a corporate job, made me kind of figure out how to have a career in writing books.
So there's no sitting around all morning waiting till your second pot of coffee when inspiration finally strikes just past lunchtime.
Yeah, I don't really believe in that, in the muse. You got to just sit and do the work.
So I mean, 63 books you must be writing all the time. What does your writing schedule, what's your typical writing day look like?
I think I'm sorry to like keep bursting myths here, but writing is very easy for me. And I'm not writing all the time. I have a family. I have, a really big vacation schedule, which I think is really part of the reason I'm productive. And I was reading something on Twitter the other day from Maggie Stiefvater, and she said she was going to do NaNoWriMo, not as, she was going to have a fully formed novel at the end of November, but she was going to have 50,000 words by the end of November. And she said, I know I can do this because I can work for 90 minutes straight and pretty much produce a short story. And if you do 30 short stories, over the course of a month, you have a novel. And I would say that's about 2,000 words a day, probably 3,000. So, I can, that's easily doable. Like when I read that, I said, oh, I'm not the only one, and I think having, it's not about the 8 hours in front of the computer. It is about that hour and a half of extreme focus and knowing what you're going to write. So knowing what you're going to write, it's really easy to write. So you have to do a lot of pre-writing. You have to kind of plan. I like to outline. I like to figure out who my characters are. I like to figure out what the story is and where it's going. And then once I start writing, it's really just kind of fleshing it out. So I always say I do a lot of thinking. So a lot of my books, including Never After, that's coming out in December, I've thought about, for years. Like it's been in my head for a really long time. And then by the time I actually sit down to write it, it's kind of complete in my head. So in that way, the work is, not draggy. But the other part of it is that the 16 hours a day, the 20 hours a day when you spend in front of a computer, I think that's the last 2 weeks before the deadline. And that's really when the book also comes together. Because I always say it's the last 2 weeks when your novel, really kind of becomes something and becomes a novel. So, and that has to be, the pressure has to be on for that to kick in.
So how long are you spending? I mean, are you doing a full outline and are you sharing that with an agent and an editor to get their feedback before you proceed to draft?
No, it's just my outline. I sometimes share it, I sometimes don't. It just depends on my editor. Some of them like to see it. Most fiction editors just want to see your first draft. They really want to see the book. They're busy too. Books are seen as, your creative output. I think some of them, are kind of, they like seeing an outline. Not really, I would say. They bought the book, so write it for us. Send it in.
Fair enough. Why am I reading your outline? You got paid.
Yeah. Yeah. We paid you to figure that out.
So
it's so different from Hollywood. That's what's so amazing about publishing, is that they want to see your creative vision, in totality. In Hollywood, you send the outline, you send the second outline, you send the first. I mean, it's in Hollywood, they don't believe in you. They want to see every step of the process, to assuage themselves.
Well, you do a lot of screenwriting as well, of course, right?
I do some.
You switch back and forth pretty regularly, and is that comfortable for you?
No, I mostly just write one Christmas movie a year. I don't really, scripts are not my my first love, I would say. I think they're fun to do. and it's fun to have insurance because the Writers Guild, for the Screenwriters Guild, is much more favorable than the insurance to the Authors Guild, which is almost negligent. But yeah, no, I'm not. I would say, you know, I'm kind of a screenwriter by accident, but definitely a novelist by trade.
So you mentioned, so 2 weeks, you're in front of the computer all day. You said 14, 16-hour days. What does
For the
your
final
schedule?
draft, yes. Sorry.
What? How long does it take you to get to that point? Prior to that, with the 90-minute days.
I mean, it's so hard. There's no real schedule. I mean, I kind of work. I work a lot, but I don't. You know, so it's hard to talk about. I don't know. It's hard to explain. You know, I can write a first draft in a month. You know, I can do the NaNoWriMo I always laugh at. I'm like, well, that's just my life. You know, so, you know, some books takes longer than others. Some books take 6 months to write the first draft. Some books take 3. I would say 3 months is kind of my solid, you know, first draft pace. And then, you know, it just depends how well the book is hanging. I would say, you know, that kind of flurry of the 2-week, let's get this together kind of thing. I don't know if it happens for all my books. Some of my books are maybe a little bit easier, maybe a little bit more well thought out, that I don't have to do that. It's really on some of the books where I still haven't figured it out, or I know there's something wrong with it, or it's not quite sparking to life. And I always say, I know when a writer has just written their book from the first outline, but hasn't rewritten it, you know, and I really think, you know, the books have to be rewritten many, many times before they get, you know, into that click where you feel that spark of life in the manuscript. So I definitely want to get to that point. And sometimes it is that 2-week hell week at the end.
So when do you know that you've got it and you can sit back? Is it because it's due tomorrow, or the 2 weeks are at an end? When can you sit back and say, yes, this is it?
I think when I feel really good about the characters, when I feel like they're really, you know, just the way the dialogue is snapping, and just, you know, you can feel that it's real. You know, I think it's hard to explain. You know, I mean, I know, you know, books that are flat, and, you know, and when you read them, you're like, you're not moved, you're not entertained, you're not surprised, maybe, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think I write them for myself, and as soon as I feel that I'm entertained and surprised, and, you know, and I feel like I've done everything I can to write something, you know, surprising, unpredictable, but still moving and still logical, you know, and I've kind of pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, but there's nowhere else I can take it, and there's nowhere, I can't make it any better without, you know, completely breaking it, let's say, is when you know you're done. So, yeah. Because once you, I mean, I've seen, working with some of my other writer friends, you know, and seeing the way they write, you know, some people just keep adding and adding and adding. And like, I sometimes have to tell my friends, you're done. This is perfect. Stop adding, you know. Whereas for me, you know, maybe I am more strict about it, but then I need to add. But then they'll be like, no, you need more here.
So do you have like a long-standing critique group, or are you just swapping critiques as they become available?
Not really. I mean, I just have a lot of, my husband's an author too, so we'll talk about what we're working on and what we need help on, or, you know, just what we find amusing. We just, actually, today is one of the rare days we switched proposals. I said, you read this and I'll read yours. and that was really fun, you know. So I think my husband is probably my closest creative partner, and we do that a lot. But sometimes you just need space, and sometimes we won't talk about our work to each other because we're just sick of talking about our work, and you know we got to talk about something else at some point. And then I have two very good friends, Pseudonymous Bosch and Margaret Stoll. And yeah, when we're stuck or, you know, if we're proud of something, you know, Margaret will say, oh, read this comic. I just wrote the Spider-Man noir comic. I was so proud of it. You know, she'll send us an early PDF and, you know, and we'll be really excited. Or I'll say, you know, I really don't know if this is working. Will you read this? You know, but it's kind of, it's random. It's not like a, you know, a regular thing. It's kind of like an as needed basis.
And what's your husband's name, and what might be a book that esteemed audience could run out and purchase by him?
Oh, sure. His name is Michael Johnston, and he wrote a middle grade book called Confessions of the Dork Lord, and it's really, really funny, and I think the middle grade audience would really enjoy it. It was an Amazon Best Book of the Month when it came out.
Yeah, fantastic. And Mr. Johnston, if you're listening, we would all love to hear from you. Please come on the show.
Oh, he's hilarious. He's much more fun than me.
Well, so far we're having a great time, I think. Well, I've got other questions for you about writing and the writing process, but I know at this point in the interview, agents, publicists, everybody gets involved if we don't talk at least a little bit about Never After, the 13th Fairy, which is available December 1st. So please tell us about the book and give us kind of an overview.
Sure. So Never After, the 13th Fairy, is coming out December 1st. It is a fairy tale retelling, and it was inspired by my discovery that the story of Sleeping Beauty doesn't end with the prince waking up Sleeping Beauty with a kiss and, you know, everybody living happily ever after. In the original fairy tale, there's an ogre mother-in-law, there's bloodshed, there's death, there's all these horrible things that actually happen to Sleeping Beauty after she marries the prince, which I thought was so fascinating, you know, that it doesn't even have this happily ever after. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I want to do something with this. And then it was also inspired by an idea I'd had. You know, it's so funny, and I always say, oh, I'll just write like a short story about it, but, you know, I probably won't. So I'm just going to put this out in the ether. So I wanted to write a YA book, which was inspired by Kit Harington and Rose Leslie's relationship, and they played Jon Snow and Ygritte on Game of Thrones. So in Game of Thrones, Ygritte dies, and it's so sad, you know, they're in love and she dies. And then I saw a photo of the actors who played the characters, and they were getting married in Us Weekly. And I thought, oh my God, Jon Snow and Ygritte are together. And I thought, in this alternate world, you know, these characters that we loved had, you know, their happily ever after. And I thought, you know, there has to be something in there where I can do something with that, you know, about reality and fantasy, you know, kind of, you know, blurring in that way. And, you know, it kind of went through a couple of iterations, and it didn't quite work out as a YA. And then, but I always had that idea. And so when I had this idea for Sleeping Beauty, I said, why if I do something, you know, with a fan, you know, what if somebody had read this book series and was such a big fan of these books, you know, this fictional book called the Never After series, and then discovers that she, you know, is in the fantasy world. She goes into fantasy world, and she knows even more than the people who live there because she's an expert on the books. You know, like imagine a Potterhead, you know, waking up at Hogwarts. They know everything, you know. So I thought, you know, that would be such a fun kind of premise to play with. And so in the books, you know, all the fairy tales that we know are wrong, you know, and there's obviously some kind of strange conspiracy, you know, that's keeping us from knowing it. which is just hinted at in the first book. The first book is a lot of kind of fun action and adventure, and has some, kind of fun characters that Descendants fans will love. So,
how many books do you have planned at present, and when can we look forward to the next?
They tend to buy 2 at a time, so they have bought 2, and but they've said that they want to do more. And this is it's a little bit more like Descendants, which is a little bit more open-ended. So we'll see. They're really fun to write, so I hope I get to write them for a while.
Well, I mean, if you're doing fairy tales, there's always going to be something new you could explore, right?
Exactly. I think my friend Sarah Milanowski, who writes Whatever After, just signed her contract for number 18 and 19 in the series. And I said, oh my God, your series is now an adult. It can vote.
That's got to be a bittersweet day, both joy at the accomplishment and also, oh my Lord, where did the time go?
Yes.
So, okay, if you were to be visited by a character from a series, I would think being a Potterhead would be easy, because when you get to Hogwarts, just don't go anywhere near Harry, Ron, or Hermione, and you're going to be fine. Exactly. Everybody else is just in school and learning magic. You stay away from those 3, you're going to be all right.
That's right.
But if somebody comes to you from any series, your own or somebody else, who would you want to come to you, and where would you want to go?
Oh, well, I wrote a vampire series called Blue Bloods, and there's a vampire in it named Mimi Force, and she's a lot of fun, and I think it would be really fun to hang out with Mimi. I think we'd probably go to a club in New York or Paris or wherever in her fancy private jet, or go shopping, so yeah, I'd like to see Mimi. I would like to hang out with Gandalf, I think, too. Gandalf could come up in his little, pony carriage and, his long pipe. I think that would be fun to see Gandalf.
Would you want to be a hobbit or just you?
I think hobbits are us. I very much relate to the hobbits and their their second breakfasts. I wouldn't mind being a hobbit. It seems like a happy life. Shire looks nice.
I had a friend whose dream was, while they were making the Lord of the Rings movies, I guess they rented out those hobbit holes so that they could stay looking like they were lived in. So you could get it for a pretty decent rate. But the deal was you had to keep up the lawn and make sure you're keeping up the hobbit hole overall so it looked lived in. That is the dream.
That's so funny. That's crazy. Airbnb hobbit hole.
I hope that they've still got them open. I mean, that's got to be a huge cash maker. I mean, why else would you go to New Zealand if not to visit the hobbit holes?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely.
And then, so with a series like this, where 2 books for now, but sounds like pretty positive you're going to be going forward, and you're always going to be expanding. And there, other than the fairy tales, there isn't an existing IP like the Descendants or Gotham or something where you've got to keep some track of what's going on with somebody other than you. How do you do your world building, and how do you keep track of that, and how do you make sure that you're not screwing yourself for future books by closing off some possibilities?
No. You definitely always screw yourself for future books. I think what I've learned is, if there's something that I think that I'm going to need in, the immediate sequel to it, I'll try to make sure that, I've kept a lot of things open. But, if it's not for that book, like if I'm on book 6, and I need something from book 1, it's too late, But I think when I was writing Blue Bloods, I did plan, like I knew all the backgrounds already, so I knew kind of the history that I had to know, and I already knew this terrible thing that had happened in the past that I was slowly revealing. So I try to, like I said, do a lot of pre-writing and do a lot of background work before I write. And I think in series, yeah, it's really important to do something like that so that you know what's going on. It's also, I mean, I remember talking to Holly Black, and she said, the best thing to do really is to write the next book before that book has come out yet, and she was like, so you just got to get on it. I know you're really tired. You've turned in your book, but get on book 2 because, when you've turned it in, you still kind of have a year with copy editing and layouts and editing to still, move things around. So if you're like kind of moving, if you still can tweak book 1, but you're actually already writing book 2, it's really good for book 2. So I try to do that. I fail a lot. I'm usually really tired after writing a book in a certain series. I want to do something completely different, and I want to switch my brain to a new project. It's hard to stay in the same project again. Yeah. Thanks, Holly, but that advice is really hard to follow for me.
Well, I imagine that's got to open up the possibility that, say the editor says, well, we like that you've written a book. However, we want you to change 20 things about it. And you say, no, I can't. I've already written the second book, and those 20 things are integral to the plot.
Oh, they don't do stuff like that.
Oh.
They don't say, you have to change. With editing, it's like, let's tell the best story we can, so it's more, I think, structural and more, making sure that the story is coherent. But they would never say, oh, she would never be a vampire, or oh, you should make him human. Like, they don't make those kind. That's more of, again, like a Hollywood note.
Gotcha. So 2 books. Obviously, you know what's going to happen in book 2 at this point. If you are to get on to book 18, do you have some kind of rough outline, even if only in your mind, of where you're going to take everything?
I think I definitely want to discover the story a little bit more. It's like the picture is kind of, becoming less blurry, but it's a little blurry. So I have an idea of how it ends. But we'll see, if I get to book 19, if that's still the case. You always think about, long-running series like even How I Met Your Mother, and how they had this idea for the end that completely did not work after whatever 10 seasons.
Well, I think I don't know. I'm optimistic that would be a good thing, because that meant that your characters grew and changed, and so did you.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think stories kind of, if you're lucky enough to keep writing the same story for so many years, I mean, it's even in a different time, and, your readers are different. I mean, especially in middle grade and YA, if you write a series for several years, the kids definitely grow up. So, and, 11 to 17 is very different.
But of course, you're hopefully always getting new readers as the series continues, right?
Yep, always the hope.
So how does that differ for you when you're creating your own characters, your own universe, your own rules, versus you've got an existing IP? Is that more difficult, less difficult? I assume on the upside, the reader already cares about the characters. You know some of the rules about who they are going in, but then you don't have the total freedom that you do if you're working on an original IP.
Yeah, I think it's definitely different, and it's a different job even. With Descendants, it was very much kind of a thrill and an honor to be able to write in the Disney universe, and I feel really lucky that I knew that universe really well, because I was a Disney kid, and my kid had just, she was 8 years old when we started Descendants, so we had just rewatched, I had just relived my entire childhood. We had watched all the classic movies together, so I knew it really well, and we were, kind of in the whole Disney Channel watching phase, so I could even make jokes about Disney Channel shows because I knew those really well. And yeah, so I was really careful, and I wanted to make sure that it lived up to these, classic movies of my childhood that I really loved. And that was really, really fun to do, to kind of feel like, wow, I'm, kind of taking those characters and giving them, a sequel, like another life. And that was really kind of amazing. Yeah, it's a different kind of work. When you write your own stuff, you can do whatever you want, and you can make the changes that you want. But if you're working in somebody else's world, I remember we would get notes like, the mice in Cinderella do not speak English. They actually squeak. And I would have to say, like, oh, everybody's got a translator in their ear because the mice were talking. Or, the crocodile only goes tick-tock. That's it. So there was somebody from Disney franchise who knew all those little things, so they would always flag, and they would let me write whatever story I wanted, which was also really fun. And the notes would always come back on something that I had completely, I would be like, oh my God, they're never going to let me do this. And they would be fine with some outrageous thing that, I'd written in the books, but they'd be like, Tinkerbell has no descendants. So it was really funny, because it was always not what I was worried about.
Well, I mean, could you kill beloved characters if you were of a mind to? Would they let you get away with that?
Beloved characters?
Sure. Yeah, take Cinderella.
Why not? They always come back to life anyway.
Exactly. Nobody's ever gone for more than a book or two.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to ask about taking liberties with characters, because obviously with Gotham High, there are a number of departures from the original source material. Alfred's actually a biological uncle to Bruce, and he's openly gay. You've switched the race of Bruce Wayne, Selina Kyle, multiple characters. Although, to be fair, between Elseworld stories and everywhere else, Bruce Wayne's been just about every race, which is as it should be. So when you're doing that, where's the line? Where do you have to be faithful to the character enough that it's still recognizably Jack Napier, it's still Selina Kyle, but you want to do your own thing and create something new, so we're not just regurgitating the same Batman story every time?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And on Gotham High there was a different gig from Disney, because they said you can do whatever you want, like absolutely just go wild. It's your take on Batman. None of these books are canon. These are, seen as, they're not origin stories. They're, my take on Batman. And so I was really excited. And one of the first things I asked was, is it okay if I make Batman Chinese? Because I thought, if he's going to be one of the richest people in the world, that would be so cool if his family's wealth came from Hong Kong. And if I said it, in, kind of a rich enclave that where a lot of Chinese people live in America, which is Arcadia. And they were just so excited for that. But, it was interesting because my original take for Bruce Wayne was not just that he was Chinese, but he was kind of like a Chuck Bass. He was a party guy. He was, somebody who was a little bit more like a Great Gatsby character, who wanted all this attention. And at that point, that's when DC said, but he still has to be Bruce Wayne, and I said, oh, that's right. Like, he can't be that guy because that's not Bruce Wayne. So I think you have to be true to the spirit of the character. He's still got to be broody and alienated, and kind of an outsider. He's still got to be Batman. You can't completely change, the personality. I think you have to have some of those recognizable qualities. So as much as, you want to play around with stuff. And with Alfred, you know, I thought, what's the most recognizable thing about Alfred? I mean, is that he cares about Bruce Wayne, that he, you know, is kind of like his mentor, and, you know, his, you know, kind of like, he's not just a butler, he's like an older gentleman who cares for him. And I thought, you know, it wasn't that much of a leap to make him his uncle. And I thought it would be fun, again, if, you know, the way he got his name, Alfred Pennyworth, was because he was married to a British guy. And, you know, it's just kind of fun to do that kind of thing. Yeah, I like playing with IP too, definitely. I like to see how you can twist, you know, the things that we know into something that's still recognizable, because obviously Alfred is still a mentor, still, you know, the smart, capable, calm, you know, presence in Bruce's life.
He's not beyond dusting a thing or two if it should come up, sure.
Exactly.
Well, when you do that, do you think about fans at all? Because, you know, obviously, internet fans run the gamut, but I'll never forget that when the first, I'm so old that I still remember Sam Raimi's Spider-Man as my Spider-Man, but I know that's like 7 Spider-Mans ago or however many it's been. And he had the organic web shooters as opposed to making them himself, because he's also a brilliant scientist who's in high school, sure. And I always thought, well, what a great change, because now that's a scene of exposition we don't have to sit through. He's already got spider powers. Now he's got organic webs. And, you know, obviously everybody went nuts, so much so that there's never going to be another Spider-Man where he doesn't sit down and patiently make those web shooters, because the fans have let it be known for whatever reason that's their line that you cannot cross. So when you're making such big departures with beloved characters, be it comic book characters or anybody else, do you worry about what fans might think, or do you just worry about that after the fact, because it's your story now and you tell the story you want, and then let the chips fall when they may later?
Well, I think that in as much as I worry about the fans is because I'm a fan too. So I want to make sure that I'm happy, especially with the Disney stuff. You know, I feel like I'm the biggest Disney fan, so I wanted to make sure that I was happy with the changes I was making. And with Batman too, definitely, you know, but I don't think about, I think when you write, you can't think about the reaction to what you're writing. Otherwise you'd never write, you know, you'd just be so scared to write anything. So yeah, I don't really think about that when I'm making things, you know, and even after, it's like, oh, you didn't like it, whatever. I liked it. Can't please everybody.
I'm sorry that this story didn't make you happier. However, we still received your money, so it's fine. What did I want to ask you? I had a burning question and it's gone right out of my mind. Oh no, I hate when that happens. Oh, I know what I want to ask you. So hypothetically, good news. I've just been granted the permissions for all IP for every character in the world, and I can give you any combination of universes for you to combine. If you could have anything, what world would you want to play in?
I mean, my favorite book is Dune, so definitely Dune. So probably Dune and Lord of the Rings. Those are probably my 2 favorites. So yeah,
Just Lord of the Rings mashup.
Yep.
Oh, the internet fans would come for you with no matter what you did. You'd be savage in chat rooms forever. But okay, I like it. I think there's that new Doom movie eventually coming out. Whenever movies come back again.
If we can ever go to theaters again, we'll finally be able to see it.
Well, you and your husband are both authors. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming you're not traveling as much to do events, but has your life been impacted very tremendously? Has your routine been impacted by quarantine that much?
No, I mean, it's funny. Quarantine is just everybody's on deadline. You know, because when I'm on deadline, I don't leave the house, you know. So in a way, it's like being on deadline for 9 months. What quarantine is like. I had gone on a big tour in March, right before everything kind of was closed. So and I was worried about going on the tour because there was, all this talk about the virus and stuff. So we went on tour, and I had like my Clorox wipes and I had my hand sanitizer. We weren't wearing masks. We didn't know about that yet. But yeah, but there was a lot of hand sanitizer. I remember on that tour. I do miss, I guess, all the events that we used to have. You kind of set your clock by Book Expo, Comic-Con. It kind of, gives the year, you have these markers. And now that they're all kind of gone or online, it just feels like this strange, it still feels like we're in March, even though we're already in November. So it's been definitely a very strange year. But on the upside, as my agent says, you're getting a lot of work done because you don't go on vacation as much, you don't travel as much. So it's been pretty good for the deadlines, really.
Oh, yeah, that's the upside. I mean, how are you, Mark? Other than the obviously brilliant decision to come on this show, how are you marketing books while in quarantine? What's working best for you during this time?
Yeah, we've been doing bookstore events virtually. I just did one for Owen Colfer, who's a good friend of mine. We did one for the new Foul Twins book. And we did a bunch of, I'm part of Y'all West and Y'all Fest. So we've done our book festivals online this year. With Y'all West, we got about 90,000 people watching online, which is kind of amazing because when we do the festivals, kind of in real life, we get about 20,000 people. So I would say we expanded our audience that way, and it's just, it lives on YouTube. Anybody can watch any of the panels. And a lot of readers wrote in and said they were really happy that we moved online because they'd never been able to go to a book festival before because there's not one near where they live. So in that sense, it's been kind of nice to have that kind of reach. But it is hard. You do miss, the energy from that crowd. We would open the book festival in our biggest auditorium with 3,000 people, kind of screaming book fans, or even just walking down the halls at Comic-Con, seeing everybody so excited. You do miss that energy, from the crowds. So yeah, everything's on Zoom.
Which, of course, is almost not quite like talking to a wall, especially not if you're doing a one-on-one call like this. But I find when I teach classes, I don't know if my jokes are landing. I can't hear the students laughing. I hope they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I just embarrass myself, or did I make somebody laugh? I can't tell.
Yeah. No, my kid is in 8th grade, and she said one of her math teachers is really funny, but it's everything's on Zoom, everybody's camera or microphone is turned off, so it's she feels bad for him. She's like, oh, she feels bad. She knows that class would have been so fun in real life.
And of course, half the students, I imagine, are hiding a book just off camera or a game
or
system.
their phones.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Get away with murder, I have no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
What has been your favorite reader reaction to something you've written?
Oh, I mean, there's been a lot. The Descendants fans are amazing. They dress in costume and they send me their photos. When I did Blue Bloods, again, this was like almost in the prehistoric age. This was before, authors would have fan sites. They made their own fan site for the book, made their own role-playing game for the book, just really created this entire world around the book, which was really cool. One of my fans almost ran over my editor at a signing. She was in a wheelchair, in a motorized wheelchair, and I think just kind of hit it too hard and basically hit the podium. And my editor had to jump out of the way before being run over. So because she was so excited, to be there. It was kind of great.
Well, if your editor has to ask yourself for just a little bit, so
Yeah.
you know that
Yeah.
fan's enthusiasm is there. Well,
Okay.
that's why editors make the big bucks, right?
Yeah. We all survived.
An esteemed audience knows I have to ask, because I ask everybody.
Sure.
Melissa De La Cruz, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
Oh, I would say no to the flying saucers. Because yeah, I don't know. I would probably think like, an airplane was a planet or whatever. So I don't really trust my eyesight to on those kind of blinking lights. It's probably just an airplane.
So what I just heard is you're seeing them all the time, but rationalizing them away. Okay, fair enough.
I do believe in life on other planets, though. So I definitely believe in that. But I just haven't seen a flying saucer. Ghosts, I think I would be too scared, if I ever really saw one. Especially I come from, Filipino culture and background. We very much believe in ghosts. And my dad, has a lot of stories, a lot of ghost stories. So, I think if I ever saw one again, that would be a little too scary for me. But definitely I believe in their existence. I have a friend whose niece and I think the cousin, the dad of the little girl, both come from an Irish family that say they see ghosts all the time. And it's just this boring thing that they can see. Like, I think she went up the Tower of London and saw some old lady knitting, or she'll just see people that nobody else can see. And they're totally matter of fact about it. They're like, oh, yeah, there's a ghost. Saw one. And I'm just kind of like, what? Oh, my God. So I don't know. That seems a little bit too much. But maybe. Who's to say, it doesn't exist.
Well, certainly, I have not seen a flying saucer, but it is on my bucket list because I feel like the world would be a more interesting place after that. Well, that's pretty interesting even before, but
who's to say we haven't already been visited? That they've already been here and went. Just said, oh, okay, there you guys are.
Well, the Pentagon has been repeatedly confirming
Yeah,
a reality throughout the year.
Definitely.
We don't have time right now. We're busy, aliens. Maybe next year. We got other stuff going on in America this year.
Yep.
So 53 books. What? I'm sorry, 63. I keep taking 10 off. I apologize. What keeps you writing, and what do you wish to do that you haven't done over the course of 63 books?
Nothing. I mean, I've done it. If I want to write it, I wrote it. I even wrote a book that I've been talking about. I think I've been talking about it for 10 years to my husband. We bought our house in Palm Springs, and when we bought it almost 10 years ago, I'm not quite 50 yet, but we bought it right 2 years before my 40th birthday. And I said, oh, this is going to be my 40th birthday present. And we're going to have this huge party. We're going to have magazines come out and shoot us. And this is going to be like the big 40th birthday celebration house. And I joked that was my 40th birthday gift. But we never had the party, and we had lots of other parties, but we didn't have that exact party. And I wrote about it in a book called The Birthday Girl. And I'd been wanting to write it because I wanted to write about this woman who was so self-aggrandizing, because I was so shocked at myself at that age that I had such a huge ego and this, kind of like delusions of grandeur. And I wanted to write about this woman who wants to show off so much and, bought this house in Palm Springs for her 40th birthday. And just as she's having this insane party, everything falls apart. So I'd been talking about this book for about maybe 8 years, and I finally wrote it, and it came out last year. So yeah, that was kind of my last, what have I not done, question. Like, if you'd asked me even 2 years ago, I'd say, oh, I have this book. It's my Palm Springs book. I always called it my Palm Springs book. But yeah, I finally wrote it. Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky. I get to tell the stories that I want to tell. I figure out a way to, match my interests with my job, and to write the stories that I'm already contracted to write. Like I don't have a side gig where I have to get something out. Like everything kind of is in the books. So I feel really lucky that I get to do that.
Well, let's see. I'm watching our time and it flies, but it always does. Where's it go? I've got about 2 more questions for you, and we'll call it a night. That seem reasonable?
Sure.
You mentioned ego, so I feel it's fair to follow up because you have had such a successful career. What bestseller list have you not been at the top of? When you're having that success repeatedly, it only makes sense that sooner or later you're going to sit back and think, well, I'm pretty darn good at this, evidently. We talk a lot on this show about a healthy writer ego, because you don't want to be so shy that you're afraid to put your thoughts on the page or terrified to work, but you don't want to get so egotistical that you're not taking advice from others. How have you managed your ego so that it hasn't been a detriment to you?
Yeah, I do think that all writers need to be really confident. And by that I mean, you need to kind of believe in yourself and to believe that your vision for that story, or your talent, your writing is worthy to be put out there. Because if you don't believe in that, who's going to believe in it? And especially with books, and movies, you have to go through, so many people have to like it. And I even told my editor, if I can't convince these 4 people, who published, so many of my books, that this is a good idea, then it's probably not a good idea, because they're going to have to convince the sales team, convince the marketing team, and then that team has to convince the booksellers, and the booksellers have to convince, the readers. So you have to convince so many people. And so if you don't believe in yourself, how is anybody else going to believe in you? And then the other thing that you said is, not to be so egotistical that you can't take advice. Definitely, while being confident, you do have to be humble. And, and I think that you can always learn. And I always kind of remember that there's always, something new to discover about the world, or, some new, and I love working with the young editors. So my editors have now become the publishers, after 20, 25 years. They're all at the heads of all the publishing companies. We all started out, young people together, and now we're not. But the assistant editors are kind of these young people in their 20s. And it's so fun to work with them. And it's fun to work with, just fresh voices, and my goal is to never be that old lady on the lawn, shaking my fist. I mean, I really do think that young people are really interesting. And I think, you need to kind of learn how to speak their language and see what they're interested in now, especially now when they have so much more of a voice, and, they're changing, our culture, for the better, I think. I find it fascinating. I think it's really fun. It's invigorating, keeps me young. But yeah, my only time when I had, not just during the time of the Palm Springs house, was also the time when we were selling Blue Bloods as a TV show. This was about 10 years ago also. And we had gotten all these yeses. We were going to do it with McGee's company, and Warner was going to do it. So it was like, yes from Warner, yes from McGee, yes, yes, yes. I was working on the pitch, working on the show. And they said, oh, it's definitely going to be in the CW. The CW is so excited. They want a vampire show. And, my ego and my big head just got gigantic. And then it didn't happen. The CW passed. because at the same time they were developing a show called The Vampire Diaries. So that show was dead to me. That was my time slot. That was my 10-year series. But after I went, and it's funny, my husband says, "Oh God, you were so horrible at that stage. Nobody could say anything to you." And I remember that. So ever since then, I really kind of, it's like, I think ever since then, when I thought I was going to have this huge TV show, and it didn't happen, I've kind of become a little bit more grounded, I would say. And, it's funny because a year later we did Witches of East End, which did become a TV show. And even though that actually happened, my head did not get big at all. I was like, that's never going to happen to me again. That was really terrible to be that kind of person.
Well, it sounds like it was just a phase, thankfully. And
yeah.
Well, my final question is always some variation of, if you could go back toward the start of your career, middle career, wherever would be most helpful to you, and give yourself some advice that would have made a significant difference for you and might make a difference for everyone who's listening, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Save a lot more of it. Save a lot more of the hits. And it's funny. I guess in the beginning of my career, I was always kind of planning for it. The fact that I'm sitting here in a way doesn't really surprise me. I knew I was going to work really hard, and I knew I was going to crack it. I just had to get lucky. And I feel lucky that I did get lucky. I think I would say, don't be so stressed. Because there was a bunch of times when I feel like I was a little bit stressed out. I was a little bit too worried, about certain things that ended up not being anything. Everything always works out.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on Twitter, find out more about your books, all that good stuff?
Sure. Melissa-delacruz.com. And Twitter.com, Melissa Delacruz, and on Instagram, author Melissa Delacruz.
This has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure, and I so appreciate you making the time to work me in between. I imagine you're going to write 2 more books tomorrow at the pace.
Yep. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thanks, Bob.
And esteemed audience, as always, head to middlegradeninja.com, get interviews with hundreds of literary agents, editors, folks you'd be interested in. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Beings. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.